Thanks to our worship ensemble. It's great to have Rick here. Rick and I were friends long before he came here 8 years ago. I think, Rick, we've known each other probably for 25 years through work with the Baptist Peace Fellowship, and he and I have not changed a bit. Yes. Still good looking, the two of us, yes. And it's great to share in this time with Rick. Please pray with me. God of grace, God of hope, God who is the source of all that is good, lasting, and true. As we explore your ancient word, help us to hear a fresh word for today, right here, right now, in our lives, in our story, and in the story of this church. With a spirit of expectation, may we say yes, yes to you. Amen. So our passage for this morning is the book of Genesis. And this is one of my very favorite stories because I see so much of me in the story. I see so much of us. This story has legs because it reflects our story. This morning's passage is the story of Abram and Sarai in their old age, called by God to do that which was seemingly impossible, improbable. This theme that God chooses the unlikely ones to bring about that which is extraordinary. And as I read this passage, if God could choose someone like Abram and Sarai, then why not me? Why not Joe? Why not Diane? Why not Leah? Abram and Sarai were in their old age. Sarai, we were told earlier in the story, was unable to have a child. And in the culture of the time, to have a child was to be seen as being blessed by God. So not having a child, the people who looked at Abram and Sarai through their lens of their culture, of their time, saw Abram and Sarai as being outside of God's blessing. The theologian Walter Brueggemann says that it is in such times, such improbable times, in the midst of such hopelessness, such as Sarai and Abram had experienced, it is then that God chooses to enter. And so we hear this passage in Genesis 12, 1 and 2. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing." Did you hear that? To Sarai and Abram, great in age, not so great in age, just a year older than you. You know, just a kid, really. But from Abram and Sarai will come a mighty nation. Can you imagine what they thought? The audacity of God to call upon two unlikely persons like Abram and Sarai in their old age without child to leave everything and everyone they know, armed only with this improbable promise that from them will come a mighty nation. This is National Enquirer stuff. Lord have mercy. Imagine yourself in this story. Imagine being asked to leave all you know and all you love. Imagine being asked to place your faith in this improbable promise, trusting that God will go before you, preparing the way. What would you do? What would you feel if God placed such a call upon you? And so a question for this morning. When was the last time that you took a leap of faith? When was the last time that you felt God was stirring some new possibilities in you that you knew would take you out of your comfort zone? What was your response? Did you say, yes? Or did you try to strike a deal with God and say, yes, but? Or did you say, no? The price is too great for me to pay. Marianne McKibben Dana, the author of the book that we're reading as a basis for this worship series for this new year, entitled God, Improv, and the Art of Living, writes this: think of a moment about a time in your life when everything went according to plan. I mean, it happens once in a while, yes? It does. Now think about a time when the plan got completely derailed, when life threw you a curveball and how you responded to it. The marriage proposal never came. The fertility treatment didn't work, she writes. The company downsized. She writes, chances are you had to rely on your wits and your community to get through it, making the best of the circumstances life handed to you. Fumbling your way along, you surrendered to not knowing what was waiting for you around the bend. You improvised. End quote. And that's life, right? Life rarely goes according to plan. And so we improvise. We do the best we can. This past summer, which ended just a few days ago, so in August, Tricia and I and our 2 adult daughters were together in Slovenia. Where's Slovenia, you ask? There's Austria, there's Hungary, there's Italy, there's Croatia, there's Slovenia. And we were there for 10 days, and we had a great time. And one of the places we went were the Julian Alps. So this is one of the scenes. Beautiful lake, majestic mountains. And my daughter Caitlin, at age 25, loves to hike. And she said, Dad, I think we should go for a real adventure. That began to raise my blood pressure. She said, how about you and I, because Tricia and Lindsay had already opted out, they were going to stay by the lake, showing great wisdom. She said, how about if we start climbing up? And there is a mountain meadow that I've read about where people bring their herds of cows for the summer before they have to bring them down when the snows come. So how about if we climb up to that mountain meadow? And I wanted to say no because it seemed a ways up. But of course, when your adult daughter says, I want to hang out with you, Dad, you have to say yes. And so I did. But I was nervous. So we began to hike. And we asked people, we had difficulty even getting to the trailheads. We had to ask for directions. And then we finally got to a place, and I asked a person in the village, is this the trail? And he said, yes. Didn't have great English, but we could communicate. And I said, is the trail clearly marked? He said, yes. And I said, how far is it? And he says, just go up, 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 up. So Caitlin and I began to climb up, 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 up. And there were white splashes of paint on the trees. And then we came to a clearing where the trees had been blown down by a storm, and we lost our way. But we kept on climbing up, 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 hoping that we would find our way. And then we began to get turned around, so Caitlin, thinking very clearly, said we need to make piles of rocks so that at least we know where we have been. So we created piles of rocks, and we kept on climbing and climbing up, up, up. 3 hours later, we are lost in the Julian Alps. We've run out of water. I am much tireder than Caitlin at 25. And I thought, what have we gotten ourselves into? Mary Ann McKibben Dana writes, we're all improvisers, often without realizing. We improvise in order to get through the day. And that's what Caitlin and I were doing. We were improvising. We were fumbling along 3 hours plus, and we don't know where we are. On some level, whether a person is aware of it or not, improvising is choosing to say yes to the challenge or opportunity that had presented itself. What other option did we have? We're out of water. We're way up. What are we going to do? Abram and Sarai had a choice. They sensed a call from God to leave what they knew, to leave the familiar, armed only with the promise that God would be faithful. They could have said no. Leave everything and everyone you know in your old age armed with his promise. Who would have blamed them if they said no? They could have said, yes, God, but we would like a guarantee. We would like it in writing. We would like to know when this child is going to come before we leave the comfort of what we know. Yes, but striving to make a bargain with God. But God was asking for a yes or a no. Not to strike a bargain or a deal with God, but a choice. Would Abram and Sarai say yes or no? But because they said yes, everything changes. We were talking about this in Lectio Divina, which meets on Wednesday afternoon, when we reflect upon the upcoming Sunday's worship. And Pam little wave right there, Pam said, I wonder how many people said no. And we don't know their story. Their story is lost to time because they said no. How many people did God go to until God finally found two people, two unlikely ones, who said yes? And then we hear these words in verse 6 through 7. Abram passed through the land to the place of Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land. So he built an altar to the Lord who had approached him. They had left the familiarity of what they knew. And God came alongside them and said, build an altar here. And so they did. To mark that moment when God signaled that God was accompanying them, being faithful to them. And as you read through the rest of the story, which Rick invited us to, about 30 years later, Rachel has a child. That's a long time to be wandering. But ultimately, God is faithful because Abram and Sarai said yes. So how about you and I? When we sense that stirring, that nudge that God is calling us to do something or say something or to take another step of faith, do we say no? Do we say yes, but? Or do we summon that courage, that faithfulness, that trust to say yes? So back to Caitlin and me. We're in the Julian Alps, out of water. And we keep on hiking because the farmer down at the bottom of the hill said, keep on going up, up, up. And we stumbled into a clearing. And I met this gentleman whose name is Today. Today. And he was running his cattle, and Caitlin and I found Today. And he didn't seem surprised to see us. He said, people are always getting lost and just kind of wandering into my field. And he gave us fresh water. And he gave us, and when in Rome, do as the Romans, he gave us a shot of pear schnapps. And then he tried to show us a shortcut. And he said he was describing it, and Caitlin and I had already been lost. And we were hesitant, and he could see that. So Today said, how about if I walk with you? So for another 1.5 miles, he walked with us until we could see the meadow that was our destination. Mary Ann McKibben, Dana writes, we're all improvisers, often without realizing it. We improvise in order to get through the day. And then she writes, there can be gifts of grace in those unplanned experiences too. Today was a gift of grace, of generosity of spirit. When we say yes, and things don't go according to plan, our faith story invites us to trust that God is with us, and that God brings gifts, sources of grace, in the most unexpected of places. And sometimes you find yourself embraced by a stranger who is a source of healing and hope. I could have stayed back at the lake with Tricia and Lindsay, and Caitlin and I never would have had this adventure. And now, because today said to me, "Are you on Facebook?" I said, "Yes." And now I have a Facebook friend in Slovenia. But first you have to say yes. Amen? Amen. Amen.